It's not uncommon to feel a little bit overwhelmed when it comes to tracking macros, especially if it's something that you haven't done before. It's also not uncommon to get a little bit attached to your food diary if it's something that you've been doing for a decent length of time. So in this video, Mac and I wanted to give you a little bit of advice if you're someone who is a little bit too attached to your food diary, or if you're thinking about it a little bit too much and you're a little bit overwhelmed. Hopefully this video will be helpful. We know that tracking your macros is a pretty efficient way to learn what you need to learn about nutrition, about macros, about portion sizes, how much you need to be eating for your goals. But as with any tool, if you use it in an incorrect way, it can quickly become quite harmful.
Yeah, I'd probably say that too much of anything good can turn into a harmful thing. So macro tracking is a great thing, but if you place too much emphasis on it, if you let go of the skill of just simply being able to eat with logic and being informed, then it can certainly turn to a darker side. But I will also add that MyFitnessPal is a really fantastic tool to become informed about nutrition, which is going to facilitate your abilities to be able to, eat in a healthful, calorie conscious manner without, relying on MyFitnessPal or something like that.
Yeah, and I think when you couple MyFitnessPal usage or any kind of dietary tracking app with dietary restraint, because usually people start tracking when they want to lose fat, that's a pretty dangerous combination, which is why it's very important that you have the correct mindset when it comes to tracking your food intake. So we want to talk about a few common traps that we see people fall into, and how to just develop a better mindset towards tracking, loosen up the reins a little bit, but in a way that still allows you to get some results. So you want to start with some of the common things that we see people doing that isn't.
Yeah, I think one of the most common thing is people failing to realize that you either tick the boxes or you don't. And when I say the boxes, I'm talking the principle that is relevant or directly related to weight change over time. And that's simply your calorie balance. So you want to be in a calorie deficit over time, on average over time, if you want to drop weight, right? Now, you either adhere to that principle or you don't. There's not really extra points for being more precise after you've already nailed what you want to do. Almost always, but for most people, like general population fat loss, sort of nothing high level or whatever. There is no extra result or benefit once you've done what's required, and often going beyond enough or doing just enough to tick the box is really impacting your longevity to eat in this way or eat in a healthful manner, because you've just made your life a lot harder than it really needs to be. And when you're putting in a lot of effort, then you might get over it, you might get bored of it, you might just find it too difficult and then quote unquote fall off the wagon. But if you're efficient with your efforts, you use MyFitnessPal just to a point where you can sort of use it as an insurance policy to make sure you're nailing what you need to nail, and then understanding that you don't need to go beyond that, you don't need to make your life harder, you don't need to sort of be more accurate than you need to be, then you're potentially increasing how long you can actually continue to do this for, and how much you enjoy it as a part of your life, and therefore be able to most easily integrate this sort of thing into your long-term habits or your lifestyle.
Yeah, so just to expand on that point, to lose fat, you have to be in an energy deficit. So usually that just requires eating fewer calories than what you've been previously eating to maintain your weight. That's the typical way to reduce or to get into a negative energy balance. And when it comes to tracking your macros, if you're keeping an eye on your calorie intake and your protein intake for other reasons, like we've probably explained to you that it's important to retain muscle and health and satiety. Other than that, your carbohydrates and fats really do not matter. Like whether you're hitting a specific target or not, whether you're eating the same amount of carbohydrates and fats every single day, or whether those kind of fluctuate depending on what you feel like.
Within logical bounds.
Yeah, like within reason. Like if you've got a calorie limit, that is kind of controlling how many carbohydrates and fats you can eat, because you've also got a protein range that you're aiming for. If you're getting too focused on the numbers, you're kind of missing the forest for the trees, because it's not actually going to have any impact on the rate of weight loss. And the biggest factor actually that would impact that is adherence. So how enjoyable and easy do you find it to stick to? And that approach is the approach that's better for you, rather than thinking, right, I've got 2 more grams of fat to hit my target. What can I have? Like a lick of an almond? Is that gonna, you know, it's really not gonna make any difference.
Yeah.
So just take an approach, focus. I think the biggest thing is that you need to focus on the foods that you're consuming first, and then your macros will fall into place by virtue of the beneficial food choices that you're making. So that's why we'll say things like include a lean source of protein within each meal, flesh out your meal with some fruits and vegetables, you're getting enough fibre in, it's going to help you feel full, there's loads of beneficial vitamins and minerals in those foods. Other than that, you can kind of just add some little bits here and there, as in like add some rice to your lunch or add some potatoes to dinner. And you may want to weigh and quantify those things in the initial stages, just so you can get an idea of how much is kind of an appropriate amount for you. But outside of that, you really do not need to stress so much. So if you're focusing on the food first, the macros will fall into place by virtue of those choices.
Yeah, so you don't need to track your macros to create a calorie deficit. Often just focusing on food selection, choosing foods that are lower in their palatability, so their taste and ease of excessive consumption. Foods that are lower calorie per bite, meaning you get to eat a higher amount of food mass or food surface area for lower calories. That's gonna fill you up a little bit more, and it's gonna drive down your urge to go and eat more calories. I also want to expand on something you mentioned before, Shannon, where you were like, the ratios and amounts of fats and carbohydrates doesn't really matter within reason. Now, obviously, we need a baseline of fat. So if you're eating no fat, then that's, you know, a bit of a red flag. But it's really easy to eat, but we've also got to consider the composition of the fats we're getting in. We need to make sure that we are getting mostly from unsaturated fatty acid sources, and it's a good idea to ensure you're getting those polyunsaturated omega-3 fatty acids. So, you know, being so restrained or so focused on macros only and ignoring food selection, like when people get so focused on maximizing their food volume, for minimal calories, they can forget that there are a lot of beneficial foods that might not be the lowest calorie per bite food. And this isolated or narrow mindset of just trying to maximize food volume may result in you missing out on foods that are largely like really beneficial to your health. You know, for example, salmon, that isn't that low calorie per bite. It's actually quite high in fat. And a lot of people who are hyper focused on going you know, really sticking to a deficit and eating as much food volume as possible might not eat something like salmon and fail to realize that it's probably the most feasibly easy way to get in certain omega-3 fatty acids. You can get them from other things, but it's just a little bit difficult. And in the context of the real world and most diets out there, most people are probably going to just find it easiest to get those fatty acids through salmon.
Yeah, and I mean, if you don't like fish, then that's different.
Yeah,
but
there are other ways to do it.
Yeah, if you're trying to maximize your volume too much and you're thinking, you know what, salmon, oh, that's got quite a lot of fat, that's got quite a lot of calories, I'm just gonna have chicken breast again because that's what fits in the easiest, then you'll probably either, like, if you can't fit a food like that into your macros, you're probably either trying to get too lean, or you're not very active, or you're trying to lose too much fat in a short amount of time. I mean, if in certain circumstances an aggressive deficit is absolutely fine if you're careful with it, but long term, yeah, exactly, long term, you should be able to afford things like salmon in your macros. Same goes for eggs, like always going for egg whites, always, and then never having eggs because, oh, that's more fat and that's more calories, not including nuts in your diet. And especially if you're doing those things and then still snacking on those hyperpalatable, less nutrient-dense foods, and like if you've got room for those, then you have got room for things like whole eggs and salmon as well. And that leads me on to another issue that we see is a lack of variety. Because tracking is quite intensive and it can be quite difficult to wrap your head around, it's very common for people to get comfortable with the foods that they're eating because it's like, well, I know how to hit my macros using these foods, so I'm just going to eat these foods all the time because I don't want to ruin things and try other things and get it wrong. That's quite a negative space to get into, and actually I encourage people to try and include as much variety in their diet as possible, especially when like the thing you want to include the most variety of is going to be your fruits and vegetables. Like those are the lowest calorie, the least energy dense foods available. They're pretty easy to swap out, and I don't even have people like, you know, tracking those, weighing those things meticulously. I just think you can eyeball your veggies, you know, that's absolutely fine. Have a rough idea of how much you're consuming. You'll know if you're getting enough fiber in or not. And then if there's an issue, then perhaps you can get more strict on weighing those. But if you are scared to introduce some variety into your diet, get comfortable trying new things, because the more foods that you can enjoy, the more confidence and the more knowledge you have. Otherwise, you're just restricted to a set amount of meals that you know work. And then what happens when you do eventually get bored of those foods? And even if you can argue that actually I really enjoy these foods and I'm going to get bored, you're still missing out on variety in your diet, which is really beneficial. Do you want to explain what you were saying earlier?
Yeah, just before I go into that, I do want to just touch on the fact that I don't think, well, most often, I don't think anyone needs to be on such low calories or such a restricted diet that their hunger needs to be mitigated so much that they can't fit in something like salmon, eggs, or a little bit of nuts in moderation. Like, you don't need to be in such a calorie deficit that you literally can never have salmon because, you know, you just need
avocado,
to eat, you need to just eat like veggies because you won't feel full enough. Like, it's just, if someone's in a deficit that big, it's probably not a good idea.
Unless it's short term.
Yeah, very short term, but even
there's
still,
always a caveat. But
even the most aggressive diet should be able to fit in like a moderate amount of those foods. Yeah, so certain foods are predominant in certain vitamins and minerals. So if your food selection is extremely narrow, you might be missing out, or at least in part, on other nutrients that are a little bit lower in the foods that you enjoy, but higher in the foods you don't eat. So if you're getting a lot of diversity in terms of your food selection, you're going to be getting a wider array of vitamins and minerals. And that's going to prevent you from getting into a deficient state. Now, vitamins and minerals don't carry energy with them. They're not calories. They don't get burned for fuel, but they are very important intermediaries and cofactors into a lot of the metabolic reactions that facilitate the utilization of energy. So it's sort of like the spark plugs in a car. The spark is not the fuel, but the spark is needed in order for the fuel to be used in the motor and drive the car, if that makes sense.
Analogy. Good analogy. So it's not all about, again, I think when you're looking at numbers too much, it's like, okay, I'm going to eat vegetables because they're low in calories. It's like, yes, that's true, but there's also other reasons to eat vegetables, and as you say, for these benefits. Like, all foods offer some form of benefit in some shape or form. So try not to miss the forest for the trees and focus in on, you know, the numbers and the quantitative data all of the time. Like, consider that, but also consider the other things as well, like general health, well-being, and all the other benefits. Any other?
Yeah, I got a few more things to add. So with the ratio and amounts of carbs and fats that you touched on before, I think being more lax on even calories and protein is perfectly fine. Like, you know, if you expect someone to weigh 10 different types of veggies and log them, like, you know, individually, that's going to be very time consuming and annoying. Just average it out and just weigh the total amount of veggies you've got, and that's not going to discourage people from variety. But also, like, if from day to day you're plus or minus 100, 150 calories off your target, like, it's going to smooth itself out over time. It's going to average itself out of it over time. It doesn't really matter. And it's not really going to say that, like, there's no reason why that inherently is going to stop you from being in a calorie deficit. Same thing goes with protein. I mean, people are like, oh, I was 10 grams under my protein target, so which would equate to, say, like 1.8 grams per kilo, where their target's at 2 grams per kilo, and they're stressing over that. It's like, there's really going to be no difference between that, like, in the real world for most people. And even the research is sort of like, yeah, you know, we think, yeah, it's like a range. So it's like, you don't need to be stressing about being super duper precise on, you know, both your data. I mean, being precise with your data entry is a good idea, and it's going to limit variables and prevent the likelihood, or reduce the likelihood, of unknowing non-adherence. but like it's not the be all and end all. You've got to understand that like you tick the boxes or you don't, and you don't get extra points for being more accurate than you need.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would start by trying to be as flexible as possible, and then if you're not... So the camera cut out, but we're just going to begin to wrap things up now. I think I was saying something along the lines of, I would start by tracking or being as kind of loose with your tracking as possible. So starting with ranges, varying your calorie intake, you know, as and when if you want, within a minimum range, aiming for a protein range, and then not paying too much attention to the carbohydrates and fats, other than making sure that you're getting in the minimum amount of fats necessary for like optimal health. And then assess your rate of progress. If you're happy with how things are progressing and you're not weighing everything, you know, like you're eyeballing your fruits and veggies, and you're still making great progress, continue doing that. And then if your progress begins to stall, or you'd like to speed things up, then you can begin to tighten the reins a little bit, maybe get a little bit more accurate, making sure you're weighing like everything. You know, you've got steps that you can add on, but I would start with the minimum and assess your progress and go from there. Yeah,
just remember that tracking is just an insurance policy to make sure you're controlling variables, and that having even some form of tracking, even if it's not that accurate or kind of very ballpark, that's going to be better in terms of accuracy and your ability to control variables than not having any tracking at all. So you could make the argument that in this instance, some tracking is better than nothing. So don't focus on being perfect, don't focus on being all or nothing, just focus on doing what's good enough for you at a particular time, or at least getting better at what you're doing over time.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a false dichotomy between tracking and non-tracking. Like, it's either you don't track or you track everything to the gram every single day, and you don't go out to eat because you don't know how to track it. That doesn't have to be the case. So find the middle ground with what you're happy, like how much effort you're happy to put in versus how, you know, what kind of results you're looking for. Because the more extreme results you want, or the quicker the progress, then perhaps you do need to pay more attention to like the things you're tracking. But that's a trade-off that is up to you to make. And if it gets overwhelming, take a step back.
Yeah, and also set feasible outcomes or expectations based on the level of tracking which is feasible for you to adhere to. And remember that tracking doesn't need to be every single day, you don't need to track everything, and that some tracking is more accurate than no tracking.
Exactly, and I think just to finish off then, remember that the purpose of tracking is to educate yourself and kind of keep yourself accountable, but also focusing on the food choices first, and then the tracking and the numbers second to that, because the goal of this is to develop healthy habits that are going to be sustainable long term. And you can eat the same way each day, or a similar way, within a framework of, you know, healthful theme of eating. So like we've mentioned before, protein, plants and veggies and all that kind of stuff. That's the goal of this. And then the tracking, as Max said, is just an insurance policy, so you can still maintain those healthy habits without tracking.
Absolutely. Like, having MyFitnessPal is not the deciding factor of whether you eat healthy or whether you do what's required for your goal. It can happen without MyFitnessPal.
Exactly. So tracking is an initial tool and not a permanent solution. So just keep that in mind.
Thanks. That's it?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Nice.
Macro Coach Steve out.
Cool. And that wraps up today's video. I hope you found it useful. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay in the loop with us. And if you want to check out the other cool things that we've got going on, then have a look at the description box. That's also where you'll find us on Facebook and Instagram. Cool. Thanks guys. See you in the next one.